There you are.
Hi, finally got it.
Okay. I've been describing your Saratoga home place to people watching.
Oh, well,
Reminding them about the tornado. Tell me what it was. What was the gun I shot that I couldn't actually shoot because it practically knocked me off my feet? It was some sort of a handgun.
it was I think it was a 40 caliber Glock. That's what yeah. Because the other one I have is a 22 and that didn't knock you off your feet.
No, I think it was more powerful. So I should stick to the rifle. Anyway, it's great to see you. So before you joined, I held up my copy of Open Season.
Wow.
I treasured all these years and pointed out I took Tony Hillerman's advice about buy 2 copies and save 1 in immaculate condition, which I did. And also that your editor wrote me a personal note to tell me what a star you were going to be, how prescient of him it was, because here we are, all these books later.
Yeah, 28. I'm working on number 28, I should say. But yes,
Okay.
yeah. Who would have ever thought? Whoever thought there would be Joe Pickett number 2?
I have something I also dug out from my personal shelves. 2 volumes that ASAP Press published. They are like a short story from CJ. And one, I'll show you in a minute, is for Nate Romanowski, a little tale by him, introduced by CJ Box. This one, however, Dull Knife, is a Joe Pickett, introduced by Ken Bruin. But what I wanted to show you, can you remember ever being this young?
No, I cannot.
It's a wonderful picture. I mean, he looks like, you look like a Western hero.
Yeah, that was a while ago. Jeez.
It was. And I was really happy that I love this illustration that Nate Romanowski got his very own cover and very own story. These are nifty little books. Unfortunately, they are available in very small print runs. So, we can't order one for you. But what they also did is that they put in pictures. It's actually glued in like a photograph. And the reason I wanted to bring this one up, CJ, is because they have clearly made a representation of how your characters look. And I'm wondering, readers really kind of like to, in their own way, imagine what people look like. So as a rule, books like yours are not illustrated with portraits of the characters. But how do you think that the TV, which I'm sure people would like to hear about, how do you think that the TV and the actors are going to affect how readers view your characters? Do you have any thoughts?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I think for longtime readers, I don't think the depiction of I don't think the actors that are hired will really change their view of what everybody looks like and who they are. They certainly have a mind, but I think if someone has never read the books, and that's the first exposure they have, they may pick up the books later and imagine the actor to be that character. I remember, I couldn't read a James Bond book without thinking of Sean Connery, for example, because I saw the movies first and then read the books. But there's an awful lot of readers out there when the casting choices were announced for both Big Sky and for Joe Pickett. There was a lot of angry readers who didn't like some of the selections, and there's nothing I could do about that. And whether or not they will put them off watching the series, I don't know. But I'm pretty happy overall with the casting choices.
Well, you're right. There isn't any way to make every reader happy. I mean, we've lived through, the Jack Reacher thing, and now we're going to get a different person who will presumably be taller, which was one of the objections. But I remember, CJ, years ago when I was in London, one of the various times I had the opportunity to talk to PD James, and she and I were standing there in conversation, and Roy Marsden came up, and he was the actor that played Inspector Dalgleish on the long-running British television series. And as soon as he showed up, people flocked over to him and started talking to him about Adam and the books and the whole bit, while PD James stood there next to me and made noises like a tea kettle. She was so pissed, you know. It was like, wait, they're talking to him and it's my character and my books. And so I can understand that reaction. But what's going to be interesting for me is that they have announced that they are going to do the Adam Dalgliesh stories over again on British television, and there will be a new cast. And so now I'm going to have to adjust Adam Dalgliesh as Roy Marsden to Adam Dalgliesh as not Roy Marsden. Meantime, Roy Marsden showed up in something recently that I watched, and it was disoriented because he was a suspect, I think. And I kept thinking, no, wait, he's the detective. So I'm wondering, you know, how you'll find all that. So tell us about Big Sky, because that's already on. How do you view it? What kind of reactions have you had?
Somewhat mixed. I thought the first season, especially the first half of the first season, was very strong. That was all written by David E. Kelly, the mega producer, and he's a great guy. Likes working with authors. He stuck fairly close to the material. The second half of the first season was based primarily on not Paradise Valley. Yeah, Paradise Valley. No, excuse me, the Bitterroots. So it was sort of out of order, but also stuck fairly close. I know that there's a writer's room of 14 people, and they're going to go different directions with storylines and plots and characters. That's not news to me, or I don't think to anybody else. This season is a little more scattershot, I think. I hope it kind of settles down into a groove. It's more based on Badlands, but obviously, from the very get-go, there were changes made in Big Sky, in that Cassie Duell character was in effect split into two women who carry the show. And Cassie Duell herself, I think the actress embodies Cassie pretty well, but she certainly doesn't look like her in my mind and the way she's described. So those are just things that, you just realize it's entirely different medium. I think the best way to describe it is, writing a book is like, rowing a boat by yourself. And doing a television show is like being on a cruise ship with everybody. Everybody has an opinion, and sometimes I just laugh when I hear about actors or actresses saying, my character would never say this, and I think, yes, they would. They would, because I made them up, not you. But that's why.
Well, back to PD James, who wanted to know, why are they talking to Roy Marsden instead of me? Bosch showed us that it was possible in long form television to take different elements of the books and, create a different storyline than you would have if you moved through the books one by one. And so I'm not surprised that that's happened to Big Sky. Is that going to be the same thing with Joe Pickett, do you think?
I know that Joe Pickett is going to be right along the Bosch model. In fact, the showrunners mentioned that to me. I mentioned it to them that I hoped it was like that. The first season is going to be primarily open season, that book you just held up, with a little bit of the third book, Winterkill, mixed into it, because major characters in the series are introduced in Winterkill, like Nate Romanowski and Joe's mother-in-law. So it's going to be a lot more literal going through book by book, provided it gets renewed and there is a second season, who knows. But I'm pretty happy with the way the Joe Pickett people have approached it. The actors they've hired, I remember meeting with the executive producer years ago, 5 years ago. And I thought, unlike earlier people who had looked at him, or even optioned him, he got the books. He'd read them. He knew how important the family was in the story, and so it wasn't just an action adventure. So I think they're taking the right approach, and having visited the set there, and met the actors and the people who are doing it, I can't wait to see it. I think I'm really excited about it.
Well, you had I know because you were really worried it might not happen, but you did get to go to Calgary and hang out at the set. I love the photo you sent me of you with your sort of director's thing going on there. But so how was it? How did it feel to go up there and meet the cast and step on the set, so to speak?
It was kind of otherworldly in a lot of ways. Mainly, one of the things is that they never thought about, and I hadn't thought a lot about, is that book was written 25 years ago. And then was published 21 years ago. I met actors who I couldn't remember from the book, and hi, I'm Cricket, the dispatcher. I thought, okay, and then I remembered, oh, there was a dispatcher named Cricket. So some of that was based on it was so long ago, but I was astonished, really, and I still sort of get chills about it, how the set designers created Joe Pickett's home, the Game and Fish office. They somehow plucked all these places out of my brain and recreated them, even though they weren't in the books, and they were so close to how I imagined them that it was just kind of eerie.
That is really exciting. Now, when I'm looking at the jacket copy for open season, we realize that Joe Pickett is the new game warden in 12 Sleep, Wyoming. I mean, he's just starting. And by the time, we get to this March, and we can talk about that in a minute, and the next Joe Pickett, he's going to be a seasoned veteran. I'm trying to remember, have we done this, year by year, or has it been more sort of a fluid timeline in the series?
It's primarily been year by year. There have been a few books that took place like 6 months after the last one. A couple of the books that happened literally the next day, but overall they've been every year. So a few years ago, I realized I didn't know how old Joe Pickett was. So I had to go back to the very first book and find, that there's a reference that he was 24 at the time, and then go through the entire series to figure out he's just about 50 now. And in the new book, he's 51. So now it's set in my mind how old he is.
But you're going to need to be careful because, if you age him out, he's not going to be able to do the physical stuff. Hilariously, I had this conversation with Spencer Quinn the other day because he has a dog as his point of view character, Chet the dog, whom I love. And we discussed the idea that Chet, can't age. And dogs have so much shorter a lifespan than people that if you moved a dog along at the same rate as Joe, the dog would be gone, right? And readers would hate
right.
it.
I never planned this, Barbara, at all. I've never been strategic about the books or the series, but I've come to realize now that kind of at the pace they are going, when Joe Pickett retires, that'll be about time for me to retire too. So I'm not too worried about that.
Don't talk to me about retiring, kiddo. I should be an example to you that you might live longer than you expect. So, but you can slow him down. I don't think that there's any requirement that he age, year by year. And the children have grown up, obviously, because, that's been his oldest daughter is working with Nate, and, will probably take up more of the action, maybe even the sleuthing role. There's a parallel in the Ian Rankin book, Siobhan, who was, like trying to remember, but anyway, Rebus was the more senior officer, and now Siobhan's really the main detective, and Rebus is kind of retired. So same thing with Ballard and Bosch in the new The Dark Hours just coming up. Bosch is actually not the lead character. Ballard is the lead character. And an older Bosch is kind of working beside her, whatever you want to call it. So Mike is adjusting to all that. Right. So why are we in Calgary for the Joe Picketts? Why did they decide to film in Canada?
Primarily because the Canadian Film Commission offers such great incentives to production companies, financial incentives. And the fact that Calgary has quite, I mean, I was shocked how what a big industry it is there. You know, how many studios are there, how many other shows were filming at exactly the same time. And luckily, Calgary, you know, if you closed my eyes and spun me around, I could not tell the difference between Wyoming landscapes and the landscapes in Alberta. They're very, very close. And so I'm happy about that, that the look of it will be authentic, even though it's, you know, it's in the north. And of course, you know, the production was slated to go there before the pandemic, and then all the Canadian COVID rules made it all but impossible until that very last week to visit, to go to the set, or for the actors or crew members' families to visit. So that made it all kind of weird. But now it's all loosened up. And I presume that if there's a second season, that'll be filmed there as well. They shot mainly in a little town called High River, Alberta, which looked remarkably like Saddle String in my mind.
That's wonderful. And we were in Vancouver years ago, and I remember they had huge sound stages that they had built in Vancouver. And I think the idea was that Hollywood had so many expense and other drawbacks that Canada might position itself to be a bigger for. I mean, you know, the film industry actually started in New Jersey, and if Thomas Edison hadn't been such a pain in the butt to everybody and determined to monopolize it, people wouldn't have gone to California. So, you know, there's no law that says that the movie industry or stuff has to be filmed in California. And I can imagine
Right.
that Calgary would be. Aren't they famous for like a rodeo or some kind of Western days in Calgary? I'm sure they are.
The
Stampede.
Calgary Stampede. And
Yeah.
that was another thing that I found very, very comfortable, was that so many of the crew and cast and people on the set were volunteers for the Calgary Stampede, just like I used to be a volunteer for Cheyenne Frontier Days. And we knew a lot of the same people and a lot of the same cowboy types. And it felt very much like home to me to be there.
That's wonderful. Well, I'm really glad that you got to go, because I know that you were unhappy at the prospect of not being able to see what was going on. So let's talk about Joe Pickett for March, because I think you're slated to be here on, I think it's Monday, March 7th, with Joe. What's the title of the book and where are we? Can you tell us just a tiny preview?
Sure. And I'm really looking forward to getting on the road again and seeing you and doing things in person. The book is called Shadows Reel. And that comes from a poem by Tennyson about, you know, you've probably heard many lines of it before, but I use that throughout the book. And it's really about things coming undone. You know, in the country and in Joe Pickett's life and in Nate's life. They're both dealing with extremists on both sides of the spectrum. And it starts out with Mary Beth finding somebody has donated an authentic Nazi photo album to her library, left it on the front. And she digs into it. She finds it belonged to one of the worst Nazi officials, a real guy named Julius Streicher, who was the publisher of Der Stürmer and was the worst anti-Semite probably in the hierarchy in Nazi Germany. And very soon after she finds it, people start getting knocked off, and somebody's coming for it to get the photo album. She doesn't know why. She doesn't know the connections. She doesn't know who wants it. She doesn't know who left it there. And while at the same time, Nate Romanowski is kind of, when we talk about a book starting literally the next day after the last one, is pursuing the guy who beat up his wife and stole his falcons. And he's pursuing him across basically the Pacific Northwest, because this guy is helping to fund Antifa movements in Seattle, Portland, Denver. And so Nate gets in the middle of that as well. So it's kind of a wild, different kind of dark book. Well,
you couldn't really ignore the end of Dark Sky and what happened with Nate. So obviously that's a storyline that you need to pursue and need to close. But I'm glad Mary Beth, because she hasn't had a major role here for a while. That sounds great that she's going to be out front.
True.
Yeah, so that'll be good. So that book is done and dusted and you're moving on to another book, right? I mean, we're always behind, us readers and booksellers.
Well, I'm about 3/4 through the next Cassie Duell book, which will also come out next year, probably late August, early September. There's not a date for it yet. And it's fun to go back to Cassie and Montana. And like I said, about 3/4 through, I just need some time to get it finished up.
I'm
Need to stop
away from fishing. I know you. You'd rather be out on the river writing a book.
Yeah.
Actually, I helped turn CJ into kind of a monster because now he likes river cruising too. And so you've just actually been. Where did you go? Were you on the Lower Danube?
Yes, we did Eastern Europe, which it was countries I'd never been to before because I used to be in the travel business and had been to Europe so many times, but I'd never been to Croatia or Bulgaria, Serbia. I had been to Hungary before, but that was fascinating and we really enjoyed it.
It's a beautiful trip. We took it a couple of years ago with Larry King in our kids because son-in-law has Serbian family and started in Bucharest, Romania, went down to the Black Sea, turned around, and then it ended up in Budapest, which has been one of our favorite cities. And yeah, I loved it. I think the Iron Gorge is gorgeous, but I thought the whole experience of Eastern Europe there's so much to learn. I mean, we really aren't taught that much about it, are we, in school? Because the Iron Curtain was behind it for so long. When I was young, anyway, learned lots of fascinating stuff. I had no idea how many Germans had been recruited in the 19th century to move to Bulgaria and Romania and farm because there weren't enough people, which led to all kinds of loyalty problems and so forth for both world wars, because also true in the Ukraine. I didn't know any of that. I just sort of assumed that they were all, Bulgarians or whatever. And now, of course, who was it we just talked to that was going on about how the whole Serbo-Croatian Bosnia thing has not ever, Tito held together all these countries. But when he died in 1980, they began to split up. And it's led to all kinds of dreadful ethnic wars and everything since. But you can't really put that into Joe Pickett or Cassie Duell. You can just learn about it as you travel along. So Cassie in Montana, that was the last Cassie Duell where you decided to kind of give her a new life, right?
Right. And where she became a private investigator. And she is, again, in this next one. And she's got 2 cases going at the same time that I think both are worth the book in itself. So, but I won't tell you what they are yet.
No, you can wait.
But I like.
So at one point, you were thinking, I mean, you have obviously are trying not to keep up the breakneck 2-book a year pace, but there was some thought that you might just focus on Joe, but then Big Sky came along and gives Cassie new life, right?
That's right. Yeah, the publisher kind of gave me, I didn't want to do another one right off the bat, but they made me an offer I couldn't refuse. And then the show came around. So yeah, everything kind of made me write another book. But now that I'm doing it, I enjoy the heck out of it.
Well, I think you gave it a different focus when you moved Cassie into a more permanent location and gave her the investigator job. The other books were really started out, didn't they start out kind of standalone-ish after Blue Heaven? I mean, Blue Heaven is the book you won the Edgar for, but after that you wrote what, 3? I'm trying to remember. How many books did you write that were kind of going to be standalones?
Right. 3 Weeks to Say Goodbye. And then Back of Beyond, which was more of a Cody Hoyt book, then The Highway. And then it kind of turned into a Cassie series that I never really planned in advance, but I like that character so much. And it's just strange. It's fun writing a woman character that women like to read about. And I've never yet had anybody, it's like the dog that didn't bark. I've never had my daughters, my wife, my agent, you ever say, a woman wouldn't do this, Chuck. So it's fun to do that.
And you know perfectly well that your daughter's wife and me would all land on your feet first if it turned
Yeah,
out that way.
yeah,
Now, I think you've
yeah.
done a great job. I mean, you obviously, it was interesting. I wasn't sure whether Cody or Cassie would be, a survival character. And I think, I like Cassie a lot, but do you miss Cody?
A little bit, but he was also a little bit of a cliche in that he was, the ex-cop with the drinking problem and a lot of baggage. And that's been done before by many authors. I think Cassie Duell is unique in that she's vulnerable. She's a little overweight. She does her best, but she's no, badass female like most men write about. She figures things out with her head, and she's kind of relentless when she gets onto something, but that's a fun character to write.
Well, I can tell you enjoy it. Actually, one of the things I like most about CJ is how much fun he has with his books and with his characters. If you ever lose that joy, we probably will lose it reading you.
I think so. I think, there are authors that shall remain unnamed who I no longer read anymore, because I think although their books are successful, their formulas, I know what's going to happen. I know how the arc is going to go. And I just lose interest. And I hope that if I ever start doing that, I should quit.
Well, or one of us will have to say to you, Chuck, it's
Yeah.
time. Actually, I'm in the process of giving the store to the next generation of owners of the Poison Pen, because I have to really think about it at my age. And I did say to one of them that part of his job was going to be to tell me when I'm past doing my job, because I might not recognize it myself. And I mean, that's really true, especially when you age. If dementia happens to sneak up on you, you don't necessarily know it. And I think that it really upset him when I told him that, but I said it's an important thing, to be able to do that, because if you love something, it's not easy to let it go, but at some point
Mm-hmm.
you do. Well, not for you. You do have to stand aside and let the next run of people go. So at that point, having said that cheerful thing, but I'm not going anywhere anytime soon, at least I don't think so. Why don't we call Patrick back and see what's going on? Patrick, are you there? You're there.
I am indeed, yeah.
Would it make sense to let everybody in so they can ask questions?
Let's
I don't
see.
know how to do that, but you might.
Boy.
Or
Hi, Patrick.
Hey, Chuck, how are you?
Good.
Yeah, let me see if well, anybody who's watching, go ahead and please send in any questions you might have. But in the meantime, yeah, I just wanted to pitch in, and I think Chuck will agree that Barbara will outlive both of us. And
hope not.
I do agree with that.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to ask you just a couple questions myself.
Sure.
It's got to be gratifying to see your influence cropping up in this whole generation, contemporary generation of new writers that are appearing on the scene. That, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I see it in a lot of writers. Is that satisfying to you, or have you noticed that at all?
I have noticed it because I get so many first novels, to blurb
Sure.
from publishers. And often I see things in those first novels that I kind of recognize, or just the settings, the rural settings, outdoor settings. And I think, before I started writing these books, I think Tony Hillerman was probably the only, major author who is really writing about, the West, contemporary West as it was, not the mythological West. And now there's lot of author and a lot of good books. And I like to think that, the success of these books has contributed somewhat to those.
I'm going to stick in a comment and say that I think that crime fiction was, in this country anyway, was so urban for so long. And you're right, Tony was a pioneer in moving crime fiction into the West, but also into small towns. I've got a bunch of small town books I'm writing up for the November book news that I put out. And they're even granular about how small towns work. You don't have to have, major villains or Manhattan as a background to write a really compelling story. But I think that you, Tony, and other parts of the country, Margaret Maron, who wrote so wonderfully about North Carolina, Stephen Havel about the boot heel of New Mexico, and Michael McGarity about other parts of New Mexico, not Tony Hillerman's New Mexico. And the South, Patrick, you really like a lot of Southern writers who are very
I do.
much,
Yeah, I do.
Me too.
Because what's interesting is that there are all these different, it's not just the settings but there are all these different styles that have been allowed to creep in. I think the genre is so rich right now, all these different influences from the literary fiction, from, Southern, from the West. I see a little bit of A.B. Guthrie, in Chuck's work. I see, people like that creep into the equation. And it's really great to see it.
I also like what Chuck has done with Nate, because, so many crime series, there's a partner. We have Spencer, we have Hawk, that kind of thing. Back when Dennis Lehane was writing Patrick, we had, what was his name?
Bubba.
Could it
Yeah.
really be Bubba? Oh, it really was. Okay,
You got Cleet Purcell and Dave Robichaux, of course.
Okay.
Yep.
And I really like, Nate is a different kind of he's not always a backup character. In fact, he has his own storylines. Well, as I said, the short story, The Master Falconer, which I love. But I like the fact that you have Nate doing his own thing in the book you've discussed that's coming out in March. I love the idea that Nate is pursuing, his case, and then there's another one going on. So he's not really so much a sidekick as another lead character.
Yeah, in this one, I would say so. Yeah, and of course, the storylines do eventually come together, but the Nate part of the book is pure Nate, and he gets a new partner himself, a guy named Geronimo Jones, who has a triple barrel shotgun, and then that's fun to write.
I'm waiting for you to weaponize fishing rods. I feel sure that somewhere there's going to be a CJ Box book where a fishing rod is going to be the ultimate weapon. Anyway, Patrick, did you have another question?
Yeah. And I know you've talked about this quite a bit in the past, but for those who haven't heard, you have a lot of experience as a newspaper reporter and editor early on in small town. How beneficial was that experience to you as a writer now?
It's a lot more beneficial than I ever realized that it was, primarily because although I was interested in eventually writing books, novels at some point, being a reporter in a small town takes you completely out of your comfort zone. Your interview, I remember interviewing the 4-H queen, and then later in the afternoon, a survivalist in his basement with his fragmentation grenades. You get to meet people of all walks of life, very rich, very poor. I think a lot of MFA types who go through college and want to be writers and write for the New Yorker never really get out of those silos ever. And by being a reporter, you're forced to talk to all sorts of people, learn how to interview. I still use those techniques when I'm doing research. And I kind of joke about the fact that even people who really don't think they want to talk, for some reason, if they see you standing there with an open notebook, they feel compelled to fill it. So they just start telling you things about their profession, about, the way they do things. Cops are notoriously gabby when it comes to when you start asking about crimes, and because they're always thinking about how would they kill somebody, so those skills have been very helpful over the years.
Do you have any good sources, law enforcement kind of sources that you can rely on if you need them for procedural detail and things like that?
Yes, I do. There's two game wardens in particular that I run past. I take parts of books and say, is this accurate? Are the regulations right? Is this what you would do? Is the equipment right? And I've never had anybody ever not want to help, because I think everybody wants their profession or their passion rendered as accurately as they can be in a book. I remember talking to a guy, an engineer at a supercomputer center for a book I wrote called, what was it called? Off the Grid, about some terrorists going to take down a supercomputer. And this guy, by the time I was done finishing, talking to him, actually told me how to take one down. And I didn't even want to know in that kind of detail, but they're so into that. So people really are very helpful, I find.
Another thing that kind of occurs to me about your books is that family. I'm not sure if I actually have a question here. Family is very important in the novels, and in the West, these families, these multi-generational, almost homesteading families that populate the West. Would you say that's accurate? Does that come into play quite a bit?
And there have been some real rotten families that Joe Pickett has gone up against that are multi-generational too. But yeah, it is. And in Shadows Reel, in the new one, it's really fun because it all takes place over 3 days, including Thanksgiving, which means all 3 girls come home. And it's the first time they're all together in the house since years. And that was just fun to, write of them as adults and still have their squabbles and fill up the house and drink too much. It was a kick. And so the family's always important in these books.
And the perspective of family members who've left, and gone, settled somewhere else and come back, you get their perspective. That plays into it a lot too. Have you thought, Barbara mentioned a couple of standalones, 3 Weeks to Say Goodbye, and particularly Blue Heaven, which was such an important book for you, winning the Edgar Award and everything. Have you thought about, is there a way to revisit that world? Have you thought about doing that?
There is a way to do it, but I have decided not to.
Okay.
I want, that is a pure standalone book with a conclusion. And although I've been asked by readers and by publishers to maybe revisit that world, I want to just keep that world as it is in Blue Heaven. 3 Weeks to Say Goodbye, Cody Hoyt was introduced. I wasn't really planning on doing another book with Cody Hoyt, but I did.
Okay.
But I think Blue Heaven just stands there, and I like it standing there.
And you know what? That world is not the same world, because COVID and the way people have moved around has brought a lot of people into places like Blue Heaven that weren't there, changed. Has that been true in Wyoming, Chuck? I was going to ask you that when Patrick was asking about family. Has there been a significant influx? I know you have such a low population level, but has it gone up during the pandemic when people are looking for more remote living?
Absolutely. It's so strange that the year of the census is when everybody moved, so they weren't counted. We don't know what our population currently is, but I know in the part of Wyoming where I live, for example, there's 24 realtors trying to sell 3 homes. People have just bought houses over the phone and moved out. And it's been kind of astounding how many people have moved to very rural locations, especially those who can work remotely. So they want to get remote. And I know that's happened in Arizona too. This last couple of years, there's been a big shift.
It has. I was really delighted to see that Phoenix has plummeted to the bottom of desirable retirement communities. And I thought, how wonderful, because for one thing, we're running out of water. And so it's not
Yeah.
going to be great if we have a further population surge. But we can tell from the traffic because, the pattern here was when the winter visitors known as snowbirds would leave in April, we would have relatively uncluttered roads for 5 or 6 months. And I'm telling you, in July, it looked just like January. And that means A, people weren't traveling as much or leaving, but B, we really had a population surge. But, but this is still more of a metro area. Rural Wyoming is a totally different. And the question about services and so forth will really come into play because people expect.
That's the big issue everybody's discussing. I've addressed that a little bit in the new book about the influx of new people, but it's not about that.
No, but it's going to change, and so it would certainly change Idaho, which is where Blue Heaven was set.
Right.
No. Patrick,
Exactly.
if you got
One of the questions, one of the questions that's come in is it's just about, do you have any live events scheduled for the new year already, or are you in the process of setting something up?
He has one here.
Yes. That's probably going to be the very first one. It will be at Poison Pen, I'm guessing. I've done a few things just locally, but I know that a full-fledged, I shouldn't say full-fledged, kind of a hybrid tour is being planned. There still will be quite a bit element of virtual events. I think because they work really well, not because I'm not scared to travel, but you can reach a lot of people, and we've all found by doing these kind of things. So I think it'll be a combination of live and virtual.
Or at the Poison Pen, it will be both. Because we've been live and virtual forever. One of the reasons Chuck comes to the store is because he has so many hundreds of books to sign that it would be really burdensome if they all landed somewhere in his driveway in Saratoga, Wyoming. You don't want to do that.
It would. So it will be everything will be on my website once the tour, live and virtual, is put together. I know the publisher's working on that right now, and I only know of a couple things. Poison Pen, and I think that Tucson Book Festival, I'll be going to that as well.
Which is right after your publication week. Actually, it's the end of your publication week, so that would make sense.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
We'll see how it goes. Right. Anybody else have a question?
A couple of other questions. I'm sure you get asked this just about every interview, but can you talk about some of your favorite writers? Who do you like now, and maybe who are some that have influenced you?
I'll start with the influence, maybe. Growing up, my favorite writer and book was Catch-22 by Joseph Heller, which is not Western at all, but I was a big fan of A.B. Guthrie as well. Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned his name earlier. I read Wallace Stegner, Jim Harrison, Tom McGuane. Those are kind of the books I just really gravitated to and loved, as well as a lot of classics. I'm currently turning into a huge fan of Amor Towles. I haven't read The Lincoln Highway. Yeah, I haven't read it yet, but I've read his others, and I just think he's terrific. In the genre itself, big fan of Michael Connelly, Denise Mina, and several others. Who wrote Winter Counts? I can't say his name.
David. It's a complicated name, but basically David blank Wyden. Very good book. Yep.
Love that book. I've just missed meeting him a few times. I think we'd get along. There's so many good names, so many good books in this. Ridgeline I'm a fan of.
I've had an aha moment. Maybe we will invite David to come to your event in March.
That would be great.
Would you like that? He lives in Colorado. So and Patrick and I did a great event with him when he was one of our first mystery book of the month authors. Wouldn't that be great, Patrick? We should.
Be a blast. Yeah.
Does he have coming out then?
I don't know if he has
I
a new
don't,
book coming out, but I think, I think it would be, people didn't really get to meet him because it was all Zoom. So if he's up for travel, maybe we can sort that out. I'll talk to Katie, your publicist, about it, but I think that would really be nice. We've done so many events together. It's always nice to bring in something new if we can.
Yeah,
sure, absolutely.
right. And I know Chuck, your wife is a big Diana Gabaldon fan.
Yes, she is.
We
Yes,
were
she
just,
is.
yeah, we
She,
were
just
just,
before I came, she said, did Barbara say I could get that new book? And I said, yes, she's, I think you're on the list. You're on the
I
list.
did, definitely so, along with 26,597 other readers so far, right? Oh,
That's right.
there are a couple of kind of obligatory questions about your writing process. People are endlessly fascinated with how this gets done. Can you talk about that? Do you have a certain word count you're shooting for every day? Do you have when do you work? Do you work in the morning? Do you write longhand, computer? Can you talk about some of those things?
Sure. Even, I'll even go back to where do you get your ideas kind of thing. That because I always start with one or two big topics or themes or controversies, and then research the heck out of them, whether that involves travel or interviewing people or whatever, until I feel like I've got that basic information. Then I do an outline, kind of a bullet point outline from the very first chapter to the very end, and then I start writing. And it's usually I know it's a minimum of 1,000 words a day. Sometimes I go as many as 4,000 and 5,000, and some days it's a struggle to get 1,000. But that's how I literally write on top of the outline from day one to day two to the end. Often things change. Sometimes the ending completely changes from what I had, but I do have something in mind every time. And I do every day, do a longhand, here's what I'm going to do today, and then go from there. And it's, I still enjoy writing the first draft of every book as much as anything on earth. And I still, that's why I think I'll be doing this for a while.
Are you an obsessive rewriter?
I don't know about obsessive, but I am always going back. That's the greatest thing about computers, and working on it, is you can go back and put a chapter, just put a new chapter 3 in to fix something that you didn't realize needed fixed. Or I spend a lot of time on the first paragraph, first page. I keep going back to it constantly because I want it to pop, when it's the very first thing you read in the book. But yeah, I rewrite quite a bit, and whatever I wrote one day, the next day I start by rewriting that, and then I push forward from there. And then when it's all done, I read it all and rewrite it again, if necessary.
It's funny, Barbara. Remember we were talking to John Connolly the other day, and I guess you and he started publishing at roughly the same time. He's just about to publish, isn't that right? Roughly, I would say.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think so. Well, Chuck is a little bit longer, I think, but I'm trying
Maybe
to
a
remember.
few
John
years.
said 20-some years. I can't recall.
Yeah, I think it was like 99 maybe, or 2000 is when he started. Anyway, it doesn't matter. But he was talking about going back and revisiting, for some reason, his first novel, and looking at it. And he was just talking about how when he looked at that first book, he saw all of the influences that were guiding him at that time. He said, I wanted to be James Lee Burke. I wanted to, when you go back and look at your early work, what do you see? I mean, I'm sure you've improved greatly as a writer, but are you fond of your early work? Is it hard for you to go back?
Or do you go back?
Or do you go back?
I don't go back that much. I did recently reread the very first book, Open Season, because it had been 25 years, and I wanted it fresh in my mind for the TV series, because they were going to send me the first drafts of the screenplays. And what I mainly saw were how many sentences I wanted to fix, and do say in a different way, and it would just, would cringe. But it's kind of like the bones were there. You know, I was still happy with that, you know, because that first book was not intention, the first book in a series that would go 21 books. It was just a book. And luckily, the foundation that was laid in that book, I've never had to regret ever, in regard to the setting, the protagonist, the town, the family. All of that still works. I know I've talked to Michael Connelly, and others that, you know, made their protagonists too old, not thinking of a long series. And what are you going to do when they're basically age out of what they can do in the books? And I haven't had that problem. So the bones are there, but there's still things I would fix.
John Connolly actually went back to look at Every Dead Thing, Patrick, when he was writing The Dirty South, because The Dirty South was, I'm trying to remember if it's a prequel or there was some reason or other why he had to remember what he wrote, you know, so long ago. And I'm sure the TV will send you back to some of your earlier books too as you move along to see what there's. Certainly there are people reading your earlier books in order to be writing the TV scripts, right?
Yes, and that was something I wanted, you know, we talked a lot about TV. I think the greatest thing about having both Big Sky on the air and then Joe Pickett, that will debut in December, by the way, is that it has vastly increased readership of the books. And we saw that in real time with Big Sky, where the book, The Highway, sold 30 times the number of copies as it had the year before in 1 month. You know, and that's the cool thing, is that everybody knows that the books are better than the TV shows and or movies. So if there's anything that piques their interest in a show, they might go back to the original source. And so even the Joe Pickett books increased in sales once Big Sky came out, even though it's not based on those. So there's people who actually watch the credits and go out and buy the book. So 1 hour commercial every week is pretty darn nice.
Is it surreal seeing a copy of your book in the grocery store?
It is, especially like in my dinky little store where I live. Yeah, it is. In the checkout line, yes.
Yeah. Right. Have you ever come across somebody, I think Ace Atkins and I were talking about this recently. Have you come across somebody out in public or on a plane reading one of your books?
I have. Yes. I saw this woman in France reading 3 Weeks to Say Goodbye right in the Tuileries Gardens, and that was the weirdest thing. But one time on an airplane, I saw somebody reading one of my books, and I kind of leaned over to him and I said, "Hey, would you like me to sign that for you?" And he just looked at me and he said, "No," and turned away. I think he thought I was just putting him on. But then another time on an international flight, I saw somebody reading one of my books 2 or 3 seats in front of me. When we landed in London, and I went up to him and I said, "Hey, I see you're reading my book." And he said, "I bought this in Denver." He thought I was accusing him of stealing it. So
maybe
it's never
you should
gone
start. Well. You need to start by saying, "I'm the author."
Yeah,
I wrote this book because I can.
I didn't want to say, "Do you like it?" Because if he said, "No, it sucks, it's horrible," so I thought if I said, "You're reading my book," that would work, but it didn't.
Well, meeting people out in the wild is a lot different than meeting people in a bookstore. People in a bookstore are there because you wrote the book, but readers out in the wild don't have any real reason to expect the author to swan by. But he can lead you. I've always remembered this. There's so many stories I could now tell, but I was on a flight from Athens to Rome, preparing to go and join Robin in Venice to do something. And I was sitting next to a Dutch woman, as it all turned out. I didn't know that. And she was reading a Michael Connelly book. And it was the day that this was the first Michael Connelly event I was not at the Poison Pen for. And the day I was flying was the day Michael was showing up at the store to debut and sign the book. And she said something to me, I don't remember, about drinks or something. And I said to her, "I'm really feeling sad." I said, "I see you're reading Michael Connelly's book, and I'm going to miss him at my bookstore tonight for the very first time." This woman leapt to her feet. And she said, oh my God, she said that, well, the Dutch version, she said, here's a woman on the plane, who knows Michael Connelly and has read his books, because at that time they had only published 8 in Holland. So, but we were way ahead of that. And so she said, will you talk to us about it? So I said, okay. So I thought, I've talked to Michael so many times, I can stand up and do Michael Connelly on this airplane as though it were Michael Connelly. So I got to my feet and it was a relatively small plane, and I'm standing the aisle talking, and the door behind me opens up and the captain comes out. Everybody goes freeze because we think, oh my God, it's a security issue. The captain said, I was listening. He said, I'm a real Connelly fan. Carry on. So
that's very cool.
It is. I know. You can really, it's amazing how books touch people, how, all over the world. I've sent Mike pictures from bookstores in Sweden and bookstores in New Zealand, and, of his books in windows in all different languages. I'm sure I'll be able to do that with you. Because TV really is an accelerator. You will be astonished. And I've been warning you about this for some time. You will really be surprised at how it goes. So anyway, any other questions, Patrick? That's probably enough.
No, I think that's about it.
Wonderful. Well, I want to thank everybody then for joining us this afternoon. This is a substitute for Chuck's live appearance as the guest of honor at Prime Crime at the Columbia Club. And the best we could do for this year. I don't know what the future plans are, but I'm sure Catherine Kennison will let you all know. Anyway, it's always a joy to talk to you, Chuck. So I'll see you in March, but maybe we'll have another opportunity before then.
And likewise, it's great to see you guys. Yeah, see you in March.
Okay. Bye, everybody.
Great.
Thanks for joining us.
Bye.
Take care.
Joining us.